Hey everyone, on today's episode, we're talking all about if you are a sole proprietor, solopreneur, you drive Uber on the side, you are a graphic designer online doing the gig industry thing, all the FAQs that we keep getting, we go through. I ask Edin everything that you ever wanted to know and more. So if you drive Uber or anything else like that to help out yourself or your family, you're gonna wanna check this out. All right, Edin, so today is going to be all about what if you are an independent contractor, you work side hustles, you're a solopreneur. What does all this mean for you from a PPP perspective, unemployment, if you got work that's all dried up? There's a lot of questions that we're getting in the comments. So you and I both own businesses, and this is like our wheelhouse. So Edin, let's go ahead and kick it off with PPP for sole proprietors. How does that work?
Yeah, before I get into the details on PPP, let's talk about what a sole proprietor is, right? There's some confusion on that. Essentially, a sole proprietor is a person who owns a business that's not incorporated, or it's not taxed as a partnership. So it means one person owns it. It doesn't matter if you have an LLC set up. A lot of people think when they go and they set up an LLC that all of a sudden now they're some sort of business. The LLC acts as sort of an umbrella legal mechanism. You set that up at the state level, but for tax purposes, you still have to tell the IRS how you want your LLC to be taxed.
Okay.
So again, essentially a sole proprietor, independent contractor, you're either using a tax ID number or your social security number, but you're not a corporation or a partnership for tax purposes.
So is that like, so somebody who drives Uber?
Unless you're out there somehow figuring out how to have other drivers drive for you to drive for Uber, you're a sole proprietor, you're giving your social security number to Uber, and then they're going to send you a tax statement at the end of the year. They have weird rules in terms of whether you get a 1099. Most of them don't get a 1099 because they're below $100,000 in income through Uber or Lyft, but they're still required to report. And that's that rule stems from credit card processing, the technology piece of the rule book. But essentially, yeah, if you're driving Uber, you're a sole proprietor. If you're a handyman, chances are you're a sole proprietor. Again, a lot of people set up Joe's Handyman Services LLC. You're still a sole proprietor for tax purposes.
Okay. All right, cool. So we're pretty much talking about anybody here who is a one-man band.
It doesn't have to be a one-man band.
Okay.
So it's one owner,
okay,
right? Okay. But a sole proprietorship can have employees. You can go out and you can hire a crew, you can hire family members. So it's not necessarily, it's just one person. And it doesn't mean that even if you use 1099 contractors to subcontract stuff out, you could still be a sole proprietor. So it comes back to really on the front end, how did you set up yourself legally, and as well as from a tax perspective, what check boxes did you check when you got it all set up?
Okay, all right, cool, I got you. So let's talk about the PPP with that. I mean, are they eligible?
Yeah, so this was a kind of big deal when PPP came about. There was a lot of confusion about who's eligible, what the rules are going to be, and so they made sole proprietors eligible. However, they also put them to the back of the list. Sole proprietors were allowed to apply a week after everybody else. And
this was in the first round, right? Because in the first round, and it didn't, I mean, at this point, we now know that all the big companies got all the money. So not only did they apply a week late, but they also probably weren't asking for $5 million.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a sole proprietor with a PPP loan, probably anything greater than 50 grand, you got to talk to an attorney and a tax person really badly.
Yeah. So, okay, so they were around or they're allowed to do it round one. How are they doing it? And we talked a little bit last week about how because there's no payroll, right? They're not using payroll, so it's a different setup as far as what is actually forgiven. So walk us through that.
Yeah, so it goes back to calculating on the front end for a sole proprietor what is average monthly payroll. So average monthly payroll for everybody else was, we pull your payroll records, your W-2s that you gave out to everybody, we divide it by 12, and that's average monthly payroll. Sole proprietors are not technically supposed to pay themselves on payroll. So if in your example of a one-man shop, you wouldn't have payroll. You would just have what's called net income. Net earnings from self-employment is another term that's used, and it's on your tax return. It's on your Schedule C. Now, if you do have employees as a sole proprietor, you would have both. You'd have wages, W-2s that you paid out to staff, plus you would have net earnings from self-employment. And so they would have used the sum of those two numbers and divided by 12 to get your average monthly payroll, multiply by 2.5 to get your PPP loan amount.
Okay, and then on top of that though, because the idea is that you only have 8 weeks to spend this, but they're giving you 2.5 months, aka 10 weeks about worth of this. So they're forgiving, what is it, like last month's average or last year's average? Like walk us through that.
Yeah, so that's where the second piece of confusion has been is, okay, well, for everybody else, there's this 8-week window. From the day you get your loan through the end of those 8 weeks, we're going to measure what shows up on your payroll reports. And we're going to use those numbers to determine how much is forgiven. Again, sole proprietor, if you have people on payroll, we're still going to use those reports. But then the question is, for your income, because you're not on payroll, what are we using? So let's forget about having employees for a second. So if I'm a sole proprietorship, I'm the only one here, and they used my 2019 tax return to qualify me and tell me what amount I can use. As you pointed out, it's 10 weeks worth of income essentially. So now the forgiveness period is 8 weeks. So what it effectively means is, as a sole proprietor, they're going to take 80% of your loan amount and forgive it, because we're using the same numbers to qualify you for the loan. We're using the exact same numbers, but we're using 8 weeks for the forgiveness amount. So essentially 80%, that's a rough estimate in terms of how much of your PPP loan is going to be forgiven based on your income from last year.
Let's say you're that one-man shop and you don't have any work right now. So you get PPP, you pay yourself. Like, do you go on unemployment, and then when you get PPP, you get off unemployment, and then if you still don't have any work, you go back on it? I mean, how do you skate that line of unemployment versus PPP?
Yeah, so my understanding has been that you cannot do both. If you're doing both, you're double dipping, because the whole point of PPP is to keep people employed, to have a source of income, to not go on unemployment. So if you're doing both, you got to stop and ask yourself some questions, because again, you are under penalties of perjury. It's going to be very easy for them to realize at year end that you got both the PPP and unemployment, because you're going to get a 1099 from the state for unemployment, and they have your social security number for the PPP loan. So you really want to be careful with that. Let's say you got unemployment before you got PPP. Obviously, you have a couple weeks of unemployment. You're good with that, but as soon as you get PPP, you better stop claiming unemployment. And then after 8 weeks, if you still don't have work, you should be able to go back on unemployment. But they're making these rules up as we go. Nothing is 100% clear. If you're willing to take that risk, go for it, knowing that you may have to pay it back, knowing that if there is an inquiry, you may have some penalties associated with it as well. So I would be very careful how to tread between those two programs.
And then what if you have a full-time job and you were just doing, these things on the side? Are you eligible for a PPP with that?
Technically, yes. The chances of getting it are very small. It really depends on what that side job was, and it goes back to your tax return, right? So most people who have side jobs, especially in the case of Uber or Lyft, on their tax return, they're typically showing losses.
Right, okay.
So if you have a loss, you have no net income, means your PPP loan is zero. So that's on that side. On the unemployment side, Same kind of deal. It depends on, are you still employed at your main job? Are you still getting a paycheck? Because if you are, then there's no need for unemployment for you. If you're not, then you're going to actually qualify for unemployment based off your main job, not so much the side job.
Okay, I'm going to throw one more at you. You ready?
Maybe.
What if you got 2 full-time jobs? Because that's how you support yourself and your family. One of them lays you off, but you need that income, but you still got the other full-time job.
That is a state-by-state issue, and it has been all over the place. I've seen comments, I've seen different boards out there where people are saying that because they still have their first job, their state's unemployment office is denying them. And so in those cases, you just have to fight. And whenever they make that determination, they send you a letter or an email saying, this is what we've determined, and you can contest. And so what you have to do is you have to contest and say, well, you got to throw some documents at them. You can't just say, well, no, I can't live off of this. You're going to have to start supporting your argument with, my rent is X, my household bills are Y, and this is the reason I had 2 jobs, therefore I can't survive. Doesn't mean you're going to get it. Again, some states are more strict on these things than others, but you got to fight for it and try. And then in some cases, it might even make sense to call some attorneys and see if an attorney can help you. Of course, that costs money. If you don't have the money, that's almost impossible to do.
Catch-22, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then the last little bit that we're starting to hear is that potentially with the tax deadline, it was April 15th, then it got moved to July 15th, and then now it's potentially September 15th. So.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that proposal came out, I think today, maybe yesterday. Again, they keep pushing it back for 2 reasons, right? One, the IRS took a hiatus when all of this started. Their staff had to go home. They're working from service centers, so if they're not there, none of this is getting processed. So I think it's buying them time as much as it's buying us time to get our taxes submitted, but that's just one piece of it. The second piece is if you owe money on your tax return, because they're extending the deadline, it extends the deadline for paying your taxes as well. And so it just effectively gives you more cash flow. Instead of having to write that check in April to not have penalties and interest, now it's July, it might be September, it might be December, hell, it might be 2 years down the road, we don't know yet. But I think that's more so the idea here. It gives them time and us time to kind of figure everything out, plus implement all these other new programs.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so there's your update. It's not a ton of new stuff coming out, but there's a lot of still questions out there about what to do if you are this solopreneur, sole proprietor, you work these side gigs, whether it's your full-time job or you drive Uber on the weekends to add a little bit of income to help support yourself. There's a lot of gray area, and it sounds like at the end of it, no matter what they come up with, you can always kind of appeal it and fight it back.
Yeah, and I mean the key here is also it is so complicated, it is so state specific that you have to go and get educated on your specific state's available resources. And it goes beyond just unemployment and PPP. There's usually other benefits and programs available out there. You just got to know where to look. You got to read. You got to educate yourself on it to be able to make the right decisions for your circumstances, because no 2 cases are alike.
Cool. All right, everyone, thank you very much for joining us. As always, make sure you stay up to date with everything. Hit the subscribe button, and we will see you tomorrow.
Have a good one.